Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
So Frank Robinson, I think, lives over in Schenectady. Is that
Albany?
Albany. Oh, I thought he was Schenectady. All right. Frank lives over in Albany. He's a former administrative law judge. Went to NYU Law School. He's written many books. I don't have them all on here, but he did write a book about the O'Connell machine, the Democratic machine in Albany. But that was like 30 years ago.
More.
Okay. That's a really old book. He wrote a book called Life, Liberty, and Happiness, which won the Spooner Award. I'm not sure who gives out the Spooner Award. But anyway, the new book, he's going to tell us all about his book, The Case for Rational Optimism. So here's Frank Robinson.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be back at the Colonie Library. I was here once before in 1973. And if you extrapolate out that if my next appearance comes at the same interval, it'll be just in time for my 100th birthday. I'm particularly pleased to note that the turnout for this talk is rather better than it was for the previous one. In fact, it is literally infinitely better, since the turnout for my previous talk was 0. And once again, if you extrapolate out that rate of increase in the size of the audience for my next appearance when I'm 100, the audience will be infinite in size, and you'll have to build a bigger library. That's a little joke for any mathematicians in the audience. Well, about 7 years ago, I had retired from my job, and I was lounging around a pool with my family and thinking to myself that all of my big adventures were done, my big projects were done, my work was done, and I could just coast. And then suddenly my wife pops up and says, "You thinking of writing anything?" And I said, "Nah, there's no topic that motivates me." And then she said, our daughter, who was 10 years old, was sitting there. Then she said, "Why don't you write for Elizabeth, our daughter, everything you want her to know?" So I thought that was actually a nice idea. And I thought, well, I'd write maybe 20 pages, maybe 30 pages. I started writing. Well, 2 books later, it actually did turn into not 1 but 2 books. The reason I was writing for her is because there really are so many messages that we get from popular culture and even from schooling that I don't think give the full picture of how we should look at the world. You know, we all know the pessimist litany: man's inhumanity to man, war and violence, profit-greedy corporations, poverty and hunger, environmental degradation, annoying people talking on cell phones. The world is going to hell in a handbasket. Well, guess what? It's not all true. And my book was written to answer all this and to show how a more optimistic outlook is, in fact, totally rational and justified. When the book came out, of course, some people said, "Optimism? Robinson, you must be a moron. Global warming, greed, war, poverty, so on and so forth." Again, the familiar refrain of hardened pessimists, who, of course, refused to actually read the book. Okay, I will acknowledge right now that not everything in the world is hunky-dory. Yes, there's a lot of bad stuff. We don't live in Candyland. And the book actually talks about some of our problems. But mainly it shows that Chicken Little is wrong, the sky is not falling, that many of our negative beliefs are simply mistaken. Various crises come and go, but for every step backward, humanity is taking 2 steps forward. In fact, we are living in the most exciting period of progress in all of history. This is not a view through rose-colored glasses. I actually used to be quite the pessimist myself. What changed me? Facts. Gradually, I learned more about life and people and global realities and how they're evolving. I consider myself to be an idealist, but I believe that an idealistic vision can and must be grounded in reality, in the objective facts about the world. One problem in seeing those facts is that we have trouble keeping our eyes on the big picture. We often get lost among the trees so we don't see the forest. We get bombarded by information, impressions, shouting voices, and too easily react without considering a larger context. A good example is the economy. Yes, we have some serious economic problems. The media always talks about these economic times. But you know what? We've been mired in these economic times for as long as I can remember, at least 30 years. And during those 30 years, the big, long-term, worldwide trend has been strongly rising affluence and living standards. You'd never know that listening to the nightly news. Our current recession is a nasty setback, but this too shall pass. Most of the world is recovering briskly. Global economic progress will not be derailed. That is the big picture, or part of it. Here's more. Compared to past ages, there's increasing democracy, freedom, and human rights in the world, more education and knowledge, less child labor and infant mortality, better health and longevity. You know, if we were living a few hundred years ago, most of us in this room would actually not be living because we'd already be dead. There's less poverty, hunger, illiteracy in the world, more leisure and recreation, less bigotry, violence, unfairness, more cooperation, compassion, option, and choices. We in America are literally the envy of the world, enjoying unprecedented affluence and personal liberty. The evil empire has fallen. O.J. Simpson is finally in jail. And our medicines now come with child-proof caps. What more could we desire? But here's the key thing. All our progress did not happen by accident. And my book explains the solid reasons for it and why those reasons are continuing to shape the global big picture. Now, America has traditionally been the world capital for optimism. But today, we have a bumper crop of carping crybabies. These pessimists, too, will claim to be realists, but it's surprising how often such viewpoints actually disregard reality. For example, some people insist on seeing worsening world poverty. How often do we hear this? But what's the reality? Over recent decades, world poverty has plunged. 1 billion people have moved from poverty, really abject poverty, into the middle class. Yet, nevertheless, pessimism and even cynicism can still be attractive postures. Cynics consider themselves sophisticated and hip, profound observers, and morally and intellectually superior when they despise humanity and modern civilization, even while fully enjoying its benefits. We all like to fancy ourselves independent thinkers, rebels, not followers of the herd. So we get marinated in all this negativity. Bad news, exposés, and horror stories fill the media because that's what grabs attention. It's a cliche that air crashes make headlines, but the thousands of daily safe landings don't make the news at all. So we get a distorted psychology of fearfulness. And it's contagious. We do follow the herd. There was an interesting experiment done where they had some people stand in the street looking upward at nothing. And of course, many people who would walk past would also look up. The bigger the crowd looking up, the higher the percentage of passers-by would look up too. So it's easy to get sucked into the quicksand of pessimism and fearfulness all around us. Excuse me. Another factor is what psychologists call hindsight bias, which makes us believe that today's world is scarier than in the past. Human beings are predisposed to crave certainty. Uncertainty makes us queasy. Now, the future is necessarily uncertain. but the past is no longer uncertain. Here's an example. We were once terrified about nuclear annihilation during the Cold War, but it ended peacefully. So in hindsight, that doesn't feel so scary. Today, instead, we fear different things, like climate change. We know the past turned out okay, but we don't know that the future will. So in comparing them, we wrongly tend to view the future as darker and more threatening. And of course, an optimist is bound to be deflated sometimes by how things do turn out, whereas pessimism inoculates you against such a letdown. Expect the worst, and you won't be disappointed. And while an optimist is often dismissed as a Pollyanna, the pessimist, in contrast, will seem to be the serious, deep thinker, even if he turns out to be wrong. Anybody remember Paul Ehrlich? He wrote a book in 1968 called The Population Bomb, where he predicted that billions of people would soon be starving. Well, the opposite happened. World hunger actually declined dramatically. But is Paul Ehrlich now seen as a laughingstock? Not at all. He's still considered some kind of sage. So, for all of these reasons, pessimism can pay. It could seem to be the less risky and psychologically more comfortable stance. I've also been told we need pessimists to see what's wrong with the world and to push for positive change. Yet, pessimism and cynicism actually foster resignation, despair, a sense of powerlessness, a why bother mentality. Pessimists are focused on limits and obstacles. They don't want solutions, they want to be right. And if problems can be solved, they're wrong. But without hope, why even get up in the morning? We need hope to find life worth living and face the future. That's what we do in creating the next generation. Nowadays, many prospective parents question bringing a child into such a troubled world. How often have we heard that? My wife and I actually had that exact conversation. But we were convinced that people today, in fact, have unprecedented opportunities for happy, healthy, rewarding lives. So we went ahead and put away the condoms. And we're very glad that we did, and so is our daughter, who is now a teenager and understands how great it is to be alive, especially in today's world, which, for all its troubles, she keenly appreciates as the best ever. Yes, I tried to teach her that, and kids sometimes do listen to their parents. But my book aims at more than mere hope. Lottery players have hope, despite astronomical odds. Humanity is in far better shape than that. We could do more than merely hope, and that's what I mean by rational optimism. It doesn't mean wishful thinking that things will turn out well. It's an approach to life that emphasizes positive action, using our gift of rationality to make things turn out as well as we can achieve. But optimism doesn't mean ignoring the dark side of human nature or the problems confronting us. The difference is that rational optimists see problems as challenges and opportunities and believe in our power to surmount them. And a shared belief that we can do this binds people together, helping us to love one another and roll up our sleeves to tackle those challenges. That not only makes us feel better, it makes us do better. It surely was not pessimism that motivated Americans to take on the world's strongest army in 1776. There could not have been many naysayers among the pioneers who set out in wagons to cross the country in the 1840s, and not many cynics on the Freedom Rider buses in 1961. Those people believed they could win that revolution, could tame that Wild West, could overcome racial injustice. Realists might have scoffed. But the power of optimism won out, and we are better for it. There will always be bad news, setbacks, failures, disasters, and horrors. Our shining hopes will be splattered with muck, and we will almost despair. Almost. But a new day comes, we pick ourselves up, clean off that muck, and we march onward. But, why does it matter? We all ask ourselves this question. In the end, we're all going to be dead, and so the existential pessimist says, what is the point? Life is ultimately meaningless, without purpose. This kind of philosophical despair is very common. My own wife often says things like this, or she used to. She's getting better, actually. So we ask the question, what does matter? What really matters? Why does it matter? What does mattering mean? Well, I'll give you my answer. The whole universe would indeed be meaningless and pointless, but for one thing, the existence of emotionally conscious life. By this I mean creatures with a sense of self, capable of experiencing pleasure or suffering and caring what happens to them. A clam, for example, does not qualify. It just doesn't have the mental equipment. So whether a clam exists or not doesn't matter to the clam itself. However, it might matter to an otter who eats clams, gets pleasure from that, and whose hunger would matter to the otter. And of course, the one creature with the highest degree of such emotional awareness is the human being. So it's the feelings of such creatures that matter. Whether you feel good or bad matters to you, and how another person feels matters to him or her. And the things that you do affect how you feel and affect how others feel. That is the true sense in which your actions and your life have meaning. And it's supremely important because it's quite simply the only source of meaning that there is. Well, you might reply, we are insignificant creatures in a mighty cosmos. The health of the planet, for example, is more important than mere human concerns. But why would that be? If you actually think it through, in the last analysis, the only reason why the planet's health could be important would be its implications for conscious life. Nothing has meaning otherwise. The planet doesn't care. The cosmos doesn't care. If there were no creatures that do care about themselves and experience feelings, then whether or not the universe even exists wouldn't matter. I'd like to quote something that Viktor Frankl wrote in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He said, "What matters is not the meaning of life in general, but the specific meaning of a person's life at a given moment." Now, you know, we all confront big issues in life. But life is not mainly dealing with big issues. It consists mainly of a lot of little moments. And as you negotiate your way through an ordinary day, in all its little situations, you're trying at every moment to find a jot of pleasure and avoid discomfort. That's what life is really about, mostly. Last summer, we went on a family vacation to the Grand Canyon. And my wife rhapsodized about her delight and exhilaration at the natural beauty. And listening to her express those feelings, I couldn't help thinking how often she says that life is pointless and meaningless because we all die. Well, here was the answer. Die we must, yes, nobody gets out alive. That's the deal. You get this almost miraculous gift of being alive. You get moments like what my wife enjoyed at the Grand Canyon, but you don't get immortality. That's the deal. I think it's a damn good deal. While we live, what matters is our joy and our pain. That's the meaning. That's the purpose, to increase the one and combat the others. This is what human life is about. Working, striving, struggling, generation after generation to this great purpose. and I am thrilled to be part of it. Well, lest you think that the book is all just airy philosophical bloviating, most of it actually tackles nitty-gritty elements of the pessimist litany and answers them substantively with plenty of facts and figures, as well as, of course, rhetorical zingers. It analyzes the evolutionary development of human nature and explains why most people actually are good most of the time. It examines the arguments about free will and shows how we do really have control over our lives. It discusses why many of our common fears are misplaced, why our political system, despite obvious problems, is really pretty admirable. It shows how America's role in the world is far more good than bad, how concerns about rising inequality overlook some very important points, how the free market capitalist system not only delivers the bacon, but actually is morally superior to any possible alternative. It explains how globalization and trade are positive aspects of the world economy that combat poverty, why corporations are not monsters of evil, why democracy really is such a good thing worldwide, and why and how it's been spreading. It discusses many factors which have been combining to reduce warfare and make a more peaceful world. It explains how and why we are going to win the battle against radical Islam, why population growth is not the problem many people imagine, how we can expect to deal with global warming without giving up industrialization, and how to pick winners at Saratoga. Well, okay, I lied about that last one, but all the rest is in the book. I would like to conclude by reading some brief excerpts from the book's conclusion. I need to explain that earlier in the book there's a reference to what is sometimes called the sailor's prayer. No doubt you've heard it. It's a very popular little epigraph. "Oh God, your sea is so vast, and my boat is so small." Well, I have my own take on that sentiment, as you will see. The book began with the familiar indictment of mankind: violence, selfishness, profligacy, and so forth. It's not all wrong, yet it overlooks a larger reality. The human story is extraordinarily complex. There are surely nasty parts. We're not angels, we're human. Indeed, we are animals, and some pessimists actually compare us unfavorably against other innocent creatures. But we arose out of a natural world in which morality doesn't even figure. And considering that, we haven't done badly. In fact, we've built a world in which there is at least some, maybe even much, morality, justice, compassion, and virtue. In the 18th century, the world's leading slave trading nation was Great Britain. It was extremely profitable, but Britons eventually came to realize that it was morally vile. John Newton, a slave ship captain who repented, wrote Amazing Grace. "I was blind, and now I see." And, seeing, the nation outlawed the slave trade and then slavery itself, contrary to its own narrow economic interest. Such moral feeling is not just some superficial veneer painted over our animal nature. It goes deeper. While evolution did instill us with aggression, competitiveness, selfishness, and so on, all those traits pessimists harp on, survival for our ancestors also crucially required social cooperation and even altruism. That was the foundation for civilization. We're perennially plagued by utopian ideologies, faiths, and mass movements, dissatisfied with man and his world, intent on remaking them into something new. Always, after much pain and blood, they fail. Yet meanwhile, human beings, individual people, undirected, and from their own personal strivings continuously remake themselves, and thusly is the world too remade, naturally, in ways the utopian battalions never can imagine. No vast bludgeonings are required, not top down, but bottom up. Just let people be, and a new day comes. The world is full of problems, but we must realize this is mainly because humanity is in the midst of a wrenching transition. In fact, a whole complex of transitions. We're still a new species. In the broad span of history, civilization itself is a very recent development. We're moving from a time when most people were poor and ignorant to a time when most are neither. From dominance by an old entrenched aristocracy to a new meritocratic ethos of opportunity and social mobility. From a feudalistic, paternalistic, mercantilist world to a highly competitive, dynamic, integrated, globalized world. Knowledge and technology are crucial. Population has not outrun the food supply because farming advances made the opposite occur. Our working hands and minds become ever more productive. That spreads wealth and raises living standards. More wealth means more democracy. More democracy means less war. Less war means yet more affluence, which slows population growth and increases education. More education means yet more technological advancement. The German philosopher Hegel said that history shows rationality and freedom on the ascent. It's remarkable he could see this 2 centuries ago. Even more remarkable that some deny it today when those trends are so much more evident. Progress is not some mystical force pushing us forward. What does drive it is our own efforts in gaining knowledge. It's no coincidence that modernity has seen explosive growth in human understanding and at the same time huge improvements in the human condition. War and violence have been receding, while freedom and human rights are spreading. Society grows not only richer, but more open, tolerant, humane, and fair. It's true that all our gains have a cost. The planet, though fertile and beautiful, does not give us a free lunch. So we do have environmental problems. But increasing knowledge equips us to cope with them too. And never forget that those challenges are the unavoidable price for the lives we enjoy. We could never have risen from the caves while leaving the planet unspoiled. The central story of humankind is our battle with that environment, to overcome its limitations and carve out decent lives. Our achievement has been stupendous. Be proud of what we've done. We arrived here as naked animals, starting with nothing, daring to quest for the great prize of knowledge. By toil and tears, we are getting it, and we are using it to improve the world. Today's is the best ever. Tomorrow's will likely be better still. The sea is vast, and our boats are very small. But with our reason, our courage, our ideals, our grit, our love, our pride, and our hope, we set out upon our journey. Thank you. Questions? Joe?
Yeah. Well, you could also make a case for rational pessimism. Now, Ecclesiastes, which is a very, very, very pessimistic book, you die, everything is going to go wrong. However, since that is the case, therefore love the wife of your life, be happy, precisely because we are pessimistic. It's what I call rational pessimism. Now, here are two cases where it would have paid to be pessimistic. Before Katrina, I picked up a book about the levees on Lake Pontchartrain, and a guy was saying, hey, if we ought to do something to reinforce these levees, because we got a big thousands of, well, he's a pessimist. Why should we do that? And so on. A lot of people say, well, there's a crying wolf and so. Well, maybe he was right in his pessimism. The other thing, if you ever heard of a guy named Bernie Madoff, people who came to him and said, well, Bernard Zuckerman, he's a millionaire, and Elie Wiesel and Sandy Koufax, and everybody is getting, so as a rational optimist, well, all these guys are making so much money, rationally, Zuckerman is not dumb, he's not dumb, he's not dumb. I'll give this guy a few $1,000 down the tube. So, my question to you, is there such a thing? In fact, they both overlap. Rational pessimism may have like a Rubaiyat. You know, you're going to die, therefore eat, drink, be merry, be happy. Actually, you're getting the same thing you're getting out of rational optimism from this rational pessimism. Can you make a comment on that?
Well, actually, I quote Ecclesiastes in the book. I'll read you, it's just a brief paragraph. Ecclesiastes says essentially the same thing as I'm saying. There is no cosmic meaning to human existence, and death ends it. Yet, this is not a bleak picture to Ecclesiastes either. Its writer tells us to live in the moment we are given, to seize what joys we can from it, delighting in the sweetness of our food, fulfillment from our work, the love we share with others. Yes, we also face trials, tribulations, and losses, but those two we must accept as part of the package. To everything there is a season, a time to sow and a time to reap, a time to laugh and a time to weep. We can do nothing else, excuse me, we can do nothing else but live these lives of ours and make of them all that we can. The grave is cold and dark, so when the sun shines, revel in the warmth and light.
Well, you call that rational pessimism.
No, I call that rational optimism. That's not to say that everybody who has a pessimistic opinion about anything is irrational. The world is a mixed bag. It's not perfect. There are problems. There are a lot of people in the world who suffer. There's no question about that. But as I try to emphasize throughout the book, the big picture is that it's getting better. We are making improvements. The more knowledge we gain, the more we use that knowledge, we make our lives better. And the bottom line is that people today are in much better shape in many, many ways than they were in past eras. Yes?
Do you think within a couple hundred years, people will live forever?
Yes.
And won't that bring about Ehrlich's population boom finally?
No. It will be a gigantic change in the human condition, whose ramifications we cannot even begin to imagine. It will change the nature of human life. That's for the future to work on, and I don't think we need to worry about that right now. Sir.
Frank. Yeah, I think I see his point of case for rational pessimism. I think once was made, like it was at the beginning of my career, the Club of Rome came with a limit to growth or something. It's brought to very apocalyptic view that everything will spiral out and you would eventually will vanish. Of course, they said there's under condition that there's no limits are put to growth. But that is, again, as you said, not everybody is bad in this world, and most people are good most of the time. There will always some people who would say some things which we have to listen. So that didn't happen. I mean, you can see that 30 years passed. And when I came here to Albany, I was young and wanted to take advantage of technological growth, and I went to stockbroker to see whether I can make some investment in technology. He showed me a digital watch at that time. Said that, look, this world is going to buy 10 billion digital watches in 3 years. It's growing. You can see now what happened since then. This is nothing now. In our own lifetime, the growth has been probably, you can estimate whatever you've seen in the last 200 or 300 years, amount of technology, amount of inventions, amount of these things. So if we had to believed in some limits to growth, I don't know what would have happened. So the thing is, there's always, you will see some elements who would express their views, and we have to listen. And we need to rationalize these things in both ways. And I always enjoyed your eloquent talking, and I know work with the PSE or opinions, and I'm sure your book will be very eloquent.
Thank you very much. I do actually mention the Club of Rome report in the book. I think it was 1972, actually. And yes, the Club of Rome declared that economic growth could not continue. It was not sustainable, blah, blah, blah. We've heard this again and again. And of course, in the past 38 years since that report came out, we have had stupendous worldwide economic growth, which has lifted 1 billion people out of poverty. And the dire predictions of the Club of Rome have not come about. Now, of course, we still have people who are saying the same thing. We've had people who have been saying that for hundreds of years. Malthus, for example. And they have always turned out to be wrong. And the reason they always turn out to be wrong is because they don't factor in the capacity of human beings to change their situation through increasing knowledge and deploying technology. Malthus was wrong because he couldn't foresee how agricultural productivity would explode through modern farming techniques, et cetera, et cetera. Yes?
I read your book, and I love it.
Thank you.
And then I gave it to my 90-year-old dad. And he's a little slow. He walks with a walker, but he's got all his, I have to talk extremely loud, but he's got all his mental faculties. And he was at a point where he was feeling a little down. So I sent him the book. I ordered the book off Amazon. I sent it to him. He was thrilled to pieces when he called me. And so because I couldn't talk, because he has to hear, I just listened to him go on. And I think it's going to make him live to 100.
You made my day. You made my day.
Well, my grandmother lived to 100, but okay, his mother. But he said the thing that struck him is that he has seen all these things happen. And he remembers a great deal since he was a child. He remembers stuff from the time he was 4 and 5. And it's not a retrograde insertion either. And he said nobody has said it so well for him that put it together to see this, that he was really turning to the left. And now he says, he says that libertarianism, he says that has something that's there, he says, and I never believed in God. But, and we go through but I listened to this monologue, and it was like the voice of a 25-year-old man. It was so wonderful to hear. And like I said, I think it's going to get him to 100 because you were able to synthesize what he has seen through his life. And I mean, 90 is a lot for a person, and when they've got all their faculties. So thank you, Frank.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. You made my day. Maybe you made my year. Yes.
I agree with you. Rational optimism, I really think that's the way I also think. There's optimism and rational optimism. But one thing that I want to ask you, even if we have everything, like material pleasures, economic progress, let's say food, all of those things are needed. and we want to progress in those areas, technology and everything. Have you mentioned anywhere, after getting all of these things, we are really happy?
That's a very good point. And yes, I do talk about this. And there's this very interesting book called The Paradox of Choice by Barry Schwartz. And one of the things that he explains in the book is the adaptation effect. And part of the problem of modern life is that, it's what have you done for me lately? We get all of these wonderful things, and once we have them, we take for granted that we have them, as though it's now expected that we have these things. So we don't appreciate the fact that people in the past didn't have them. We just expect it now. And the question is, again, what have you done for me lately? It's that mental attitude. And frankly, it's not something that I have. And I tried to bring this across in the book, because I don't feel that I take for granted all of the things about modern life. There's so many little things in modern life that I appreciate so deeply, and every time I experience them, I just marvel at the wonderfulness of it. Every time I get on an airplane, I just sit there and I'm just astounded that we can do this. It's just always new and wonderful to me. And I think you have to try to go through life that way. In the back.
On your trip to the Grand Canyon, I assume you drove.
No, we went on a package tour, actually.
By plane.
Oh, we did do a helicopter ride over the Grand Canyon.
Okay, well, the point I'm reaching is that the Grand Canyon, that great natural, you were able to see it because of oil.
Because of
oil. I'm sure you're familiar with James Kunstler up in Syria.
Oh, yes.
Okay, you can reject him, but our optimistic standard of living that you describe, and I haven't read this one, but I read your earlier one, I like it. But our entire way of life is based on cheap oil. We have 5% of the world's population, but we consume 25% of the resources of the world. Now BP, the large corporations, which I think you like, they can drill down a mile below the oceans and try to continue to extract that black gold so that we can live the way we're living. But it's going to end. The oil is a finite resource. We had no capacity to replace everything that we use oil for and maintain our standard of living. This good life, which we all like and you like. So my question is the black gold that has made our optimism up to this point, and what will happen in the future?
Well, there's another example of not taking sufficient account of the possibilities for technological change. The first energy crisis in Europe was when they started to run out of wood. And the solution to that energy crisis was coal. So for a couple of centuries, they used coal. And then they ran into a problem because they couldn't get the coal out of the ground. It was deeper, and the technological problems, and they couldn't get enough coal out of the ground. Well, the solution to that was, of course, oil. So, now we're on the third thing. Oil, we don't have a love affair with oil. We have a marriage of convenience. And that marriage is going to end when its time will come. And it will come. There will be technological change. And the world doesn't stay the same. So yes, is it conceivably a problem? Sure. We will have some difficulties in the transition. We always have transition difficulties. But I think we'll do it. Yes?
Oh, I was just going to say, there'll be another technological advance after the oil. So they'll find something. The problem is dealing with governments who tax to the kazoo anybody that corporations, and corporations are not innocents either, but they do provide R&D. Okay, for those of you who don't know, research and development. If you tax them so they can't exist and fund the research and development, then you're going to have problems. You're going to have problems with new technology, new processes, anything that can better a life. I mean, who comes up with these ideas except individuals and corporations? I don't think any housewife sitting in her room, except maybe in her kitchen, is coming up with an answer to oil. So you have to allow the freedom. If governments stop the freedom and stop the flow, then what are you going to have?
Well, I happen to think that the great problem of the 21st century will prove to be controlling the power of overpowerful government. And we're beginning to see it, for example, in the Greek situation, where Greece had a government that was just suffocating the Greek economy and was taking too much money, spending too much money, and can't seem to get to grips with it. But yes, over here.
Is optimism genetic, do you think? Like, are you born that way? Or?
Partly yes. There's another very interesting book by Martin Seligman called Learned Optimism. And there is a genetic component. There are people who have a basic set point that's down versus people who have a set point that's higher. I think I'm at one end of the scale. But Seligman's point is that you can learn to change yourself. There are techniques that you can use to move your set point towards a more positive, optimistic stance. Very good book. I highly recommend it. Yes?
I like everything you had to say. I haven't read your book, but I'm going to. But I'm curious to know where terrorism fits in. I think I am an optimistic person by genetic makeup and maybe a little bit of my own learned optimism. But the one piece that I didn't hear you address that does frighten me are the terrorists.
Well, yeah, look, let's have some perspective about this. During the Cold War, we faced an enemy that controlled a sizable part of the world. I won't say it was half the world, but a sizable part of the world that had a huge nuclear arsenal. That was an existential threat. It was an enemy that seriously targeted control of the entire world. That passed away. The Islamic terrorists that we face are not remotely in that category of threat. I mean, 9/11 was a terrible tragedy, but 9/11 killed 3,000 of our people, knocked down a few of our buildings out of our huge country. It did not stop our country. It did not really change our country significantly. There isn't really anything that Islamic terrorism can do to us that would really harm us. We have to have a perspective about this. And you know, I have a whole chapter about this in the book. I think there are some things that we can do and we are doing to combat this. And in the end, we'll have to win. There's no question about that. This is going to burn itself out. Over here.
Why do you think it's been going on for hundreds of years. Why do you think it's going to burn itself out?
No, it hasn't gone on for hundreds of years. It's gone on for about 30 years, what we're seeing today. Of course, you know, there's always conflict in the world. You're never going to have a world that's without conflict, or, well, let me take that back. An overwhelming proportion of the conflict in the world has always come about because of non-democratic state actors. Virtually all of the wars in history have been caused by regimes that are not democratically accountable to their populations. And the trend in the world is towards more and more democracy. And that's one of the reasons why there has been less and less war in the world. The more democracy you have, the less war. I could foresee a day when virtually all of the nations in the world will be democracies, and when that day comes, I think that the age of conflict will disappear. As long as we have non-democratic state actors, there will still be conflicts. Yes?
I just have this last comment. Terrorism, yeah, it is scary, and Islam radical factor is definitely there. But if you look at religions, I mean, if you look at history, we have to learn from that. There is violence from every religion. I shouldn't say every, but a lot of, there was Christian community was that way in the beginning, and then now it is Islam. So it is not like one religion you can say, yes, at this point we have to deal with that. But we have, as a human community, we have dealt with that in every century with different religions.
Well, yeah, there is an evolution. And you're absolutely right. In the history of Christianity, for many centuries, many people went to the fire, were burned at the stake because of differing religious views. Well, you know, today we say that in America we have this resurgence of religious fundamentalism. But you know something? I don't know of any religious fundamentalist in America who wants to burn at the stake all of the atheists. You know, that day is past as far as in the Christian world. The Islamic world has not quite caught up, but I think, you know, that evolution will occur also. Yes?
Would you like to speak to the medical findings in optimism?
What can I say? The life expectancy worldwide on average in the year 1900 was, guess what? Can you guess? 31. 31. Today it's worldwide 67. And in the advanced countries it's even higher.
But I'm talking about the link between optimism and wellness, optimism and lack of disease.
There's a lot of literature about that. Barbara Ehrenreich disagrees, not my favorite writer. That's a very complicated subject. But I personally do believe that being optimistic and positive thinking has a good impact on one's health. Yes. Sir?
Yeah, this comment about certain resources such as oil are limited will come to an end. Yes, it might happen, it may not happen. Nobody can be 100% sure about it. Some of these things are also talked about in that Club of Rome book some time ago. At one point, we've seen this natural gas will come to an end. So nobody should burn natural gas in power plants, and you've seen that thing. There's a legislation in the federal government prohibiting burning of the gas. All of a sudden, what happened now? You see glut of natural gas everywhere. Then they don't know what to do. They're capping the wells, and they're encouraging power plants to use it. All power plants are burning gas again. So yes, it can come to an end, it may not. And again, when one comes to an end, something might come up. This is what Alan Greenspan sometimes spoke about, creative destruction. So certain technologies, certain resources, when they destruct, something else will be created. So we don't know what will happen. Earth is, while it may be small compared to the universe, it has tremendous amount of things in it. We don't even understand what's inside. So we don't know how long it will last, whether the atoms will be broken and to provide you tremendous amount of energy, which will never exhaust. We don't know. A number of things could happen. So there is room for optimism here, and I think we have to take it cautiously.
Just to make one brief comment about it, solar power is still in its infancy of development, but the amount of solar energy that reaches the Earth is something like 100 times what human beings use for energy. So there's potential there, let's put it that way. Yes?
The oil companies have so much power that I don't think they're going to allow us to go too far in all these other optional forms of energy. They seem to control the government. They control with their money, with their force, that they aren't going to let us go that direction.
Well, you know, I seem to recall one of the most powerful corporations of all time was a company called AT&T, which seemed to control the world until it didn't. You know, in a short period of time, AT&T virtually disappeared from the map. The name is still used, but it's because the company went defunct and the name was bought by some other entity. Technological change is not going to be stopped by economic interests. George.
I'm not quite sure where to begin. I have a couple of disjointed thoughts. The first one being on the progression from wood to coal to petroleum to what? Optimism says we will proceed to something else, to the next equivalent. Pessimism says we will not. One or the other is going to happen. Simply looking forward to it happening, or simple gloom over the proposition that it will not happen, is not what will happen. I think what you have done overall is set forth two propositions. One, that from a mental, psychological point of view, it's better to be optimistic than pessimistic. And two, you have set forth what your book calls the case for rational optimism, which I presume includes, sets forth facts A, B, C, D, etc., why we should be optimistic. I'm inclined to agree with everything you said. I believe you've only said half the picture. Somebody could, if he had more time than I had this morning, set down an equally rational case for pessimism.
Well, that book has been written. I quoted from the guy. I attended one of his lectures. A very general comment. The future always defies predictions. Nobody has ever been very good at predicting the future. It's fundamentally beyond our ability to predict. So we just don't know. There's always going to be things happening that nobody ever anticipated. That's the nature of things. One more.
One of the things that you talk about a lot in your book, which you didn't really address in your speech, in your talk, was the optimism that goes along with political institutions. That you talked about a democracy, but there's always a problem with democracies. You know, they give you the boot, and yet they also give you a ladder. But in order to get this optimism, there has to be a great deal of freedom. I don't mean freedom to trample over anybody else. I'm talking about, you know, the freedom to allow people to progress, to use their best ideas to promote these optimistic things that are going to happen. Can you address that?
Well, I agree with you completely. It's the vision of individuals that has pushed mankind forward, and the challenge of the future is to keep government in its limited place as the facilitator of individuals realizing their potential. That's what government should be, is the facilitator, not the boss. That's the way I see it, and I agree with you.
Frank has some of his books for sale if you want to buy one, and thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much.